Good afternoon. Um, Welcome to Fashion Forward, Centering Justice in Fashion History. This is the last Monday monologue of the semester. My name is Susan Gent, and I'm with University Library. Today's presentation and conversation demonstrate how institutions like Iowa State are examining holdings and artifacts with a more contemporary inclusive lens. I found the online exhibit, very well. There was just a lot in there because this is really a strong scholarly examination, and it just made me think about everything I'm wearing, about what's in my home, in new ways. So I found it like a really good starting point for more personal investigations. Then I had an opportunity this morning to see the in-person exhibit, and it was really a lovely pairing after I had done all that reading and some of that thinking to go over to Morrill Hall and see the in-person exhibit. So we will be reminding you about that again as we continue. Basically, the Mary Alice Gallery is open whenever Morrill Hall is, and it's from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. So you can stop it in and see this since we're not only virtual anymore. So I want to introduce today's facilitator. As outreach archivist for Iowa State University's library special collections and university archives for the last 6 years, today's facilitator, Rachel Seal, coordinates instructions, exhibits, and public programming. And today, Rachel will be talking with the Fashion Forward team about their research process, and she'll be looking forward to your questions. I do want to note that today's conversation might contain adult language and adult themes, and that in about a week, we will have this recording archived with captions at the University Library's YouTube page. And before I hand it over to Rachel, I do want to acknowledge that it is Indigenous Peoples Day, and this land acknowledgement was actually in the Fashion Forward presentation. So I thought for so many reasons, it's especially important to take this moment to think about who we are and where we are. So the statement reads, I was stating a welcoming and inclusive environment where diverse individuals can succeed and thrive. As a land-grant institution, we are committed to the caretaking of this land and would like to begin this event by acknowledging those who have previously taken care of the land on which we gather. Before this site became Iowa State University, it was the ancestral lands and territory of the Bakodze, or Iowa Nation. The United States obtained the land from the Meskwaki and Sauk nations in the Treaty of 1842. We wish to recognize our obligations to this land and to the people who took care of it, as well as to the 17,000 Native people who live in Iowa today. So thank everyone for being here. I'm going to go away and let Rachel introduce the students, and then we'll have a short presentation before questions. Thanks, everybody.
Hello. I'm going to introduce the curators for today's presentation and for the exhibit Fashion Forward, Centering Justice in Fashion History. The curators are Kira G. Streck, Ginger D. Stanciel, and Joshua D. Simon. Welcome. I will let you all take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our presentation on our exhibition at the Iowa State University Textiles and Clothing Museum titled Fashion Forward, Centering Justice in Fashion History. We launched the digital exhibition July 30th, 2021, using Microsoft Sway, an open access platform hosted at Iowa State. If you would like to visit the full digital exhibition and its interactive elements, please scan the QR code or check out the link, which we put in the chat. Myself, Kira Streck, Ginger Stanciel, Joshua Simon, Dr. Kelly Reddy Best, and Dr. Jennifer Farley Gordon curated the exhibition. Myself, Ginger, and Joshua are master's students in the Apparel, Merchandising, and Design program at Iowa State and hold the endowed Agatha Huthenbecker Burnett Graduate Teaching and Research Assistantship in the Textiles and Clothing Museum. Dr. Reddy Best is an associate professor in Apparel, Merchandising, and Design, and is also the curator and director at the Textiles and Clothing Museum. Dr. Gordon is a lecturer in Apparel, Merchandising, and Design, and also serves as the digital curator for the museum.
The concept for this exhibition originated from the development of our museum's new mission statement, which centers commitments to social justice and intersectionality in the study of fashion history. In this exhibition, we reinterpret object highlights from the collection through this critical lens and acknowledge intersections with historically marginalized communities to tell justice-oriented stories. A number of museums and institutions have aligned with the hashtag Museums Are Not Neutral movement, which promotes the idea that museums operating and collecting policies are rooted in colonial oppressive practices, which are linked to broader systemic societal issues. Through our exhibition, we actively reject discriminatory practices and uplift marginalized voices and stories to create a more socially just and equitable fashion history narrative.
Apologies. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge those who have previously taken care of the land on which we gather. Before this site became Iowa State University, it was the ancestral lands and territory of the Bokoje or Iowa Nation. The United States obtained the land from the Meskwaki and Sook nations in the Treaty of 1842. We wish to recognize our obligations to this land and to the people who take care of it, as well as the 17,000 Native people who live in Iowa today. In this exhibition, we analyzed 20 objects selected from the 2013 published exhibition catalog, Treasures of the Textiles and Clothing Museum. These objects range in date from the 18th to 21st century and were deemed important objects and stories. The previous curators mounted the exhibition and published the corresponding catalog. We reinterpret these objects through an intersectional justice-oriented lens.
We identified 6 themes seen here. We will highlight each by discussing one object per theme. In the first theme, we examine the concepts of cultural appropriation and imperialism. Cultural appropriation refers to the taking, borrowing, reframing, and/or utilizing of creative expressions from one cultural group by another, without giving credit to the source community or the significance of the design to the community. In this theme, we investigate the complex entanglements of a globalized fashion system and how the producers of the objects featured in this theme drew upon elements of cultures distant, near to, and far from their own. In this theme, we reinterpret a textile sample designed by William Morris dating to the late 19th century. Scholars argue that what is now called chintz in the United States and Europe originated in either India or Egypt at least 2,000 years ago. Chintz, or as it is known in India, kalamkari, became incredibly popular in Europe, particularly Britain. To satisfy European consumers, Indian artisans began tailoring the print to fit European aesthetics. William Morris, the designer of this sample, began his textile company in 1861, and he quickly became a leading British textile designer. Despite the textile's origins in Indian artistry, chintz has colloquially become associated with British culture and design aesthetics and the romanticization of the British countryside, hence whitewashing and flattening the textile's ancient and complex history.
In the next theme, we examined objects with heightened attention to racial inequities. Racial inequity is prevalent in social systems throughout history, including Western fashion. White supremacy has led to extreme violence against people of color. The stories we tell and the objects within this theme highlight these inequities through the lenses of fashion. In many cases, the provenance of these objects also highlights the pronounced overrepresentation of material culture connected to the white and well-to-do within museum collections. Eric C. Wilson, a white-appearing former University of Iowa student, wore this Olympic sweater and cap to the 1924 Summer Olympics. He competed for Team USA in the 400-meter dash amongst a total of 3,088 athletes, of which only 135 were women. Wilson's track and field teammates D. Hart Hubbard, pictured on the right, and Ned Gordon, pictured on the left, were African-American broad jumpers and won gold and silver respectively. The stories and objects of marginalized individuals like Hubbard and Gordon often have been neglected. The Ted Stevens Act of 1978 aided in addressing some Olympic team inequities, spurring more women and people of color to be accepted onto Team USA, but notably did not extend to LGBTQ+ identifying athletes who still experience exclusion and discrimination today. We examined objects with heightened attention to socioeconomic and class barriers. This concept of socioeconomic class affects museums' historical collection practices of seeking high-quality, lavish objects owned or worn by wealthy individuals. Through the object stories within this theme, we decenter this dominant high socioeconomic class narrative by focusing on the class barriers faced by many individuals when fashioning themselves. Throughout history, some North American and European women have opted for quality fashionable dresses that can be worn for many occasions, such as this ensemble. Mary Makepeace Nichols wore this circa 1885 dress in a ceremony officiated by Henry Ward Beecher, the famous pastor and abolitionist. In doing so, she followed in the tradition of practicality. While contemporary United States society thinks of white wedding gowns as a long-standing tradition, Queen Victoria popularized the wearing of white for weddings in her 1840 wedding, which the image on the right is a close-up of Queen Victoria's wedding dress. It wasn't until the 1950s that white wedding dresses became popular amongst all social classes, with many Western brides during the first half of the 20th century opting for ensembles that could be worn multiple times.
In our next theme, we examined objects with attention to issues related to environmental justice. Activists at Green Action define environmental racism as the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. Fashion brands, retailers, and manufacturers are some of the leading contributors to environmental justice issues, as they often pollute waterways with toxic dyes and other discarded materials near low-income housing or neighborhoods and communities of color in the United States and other countries around the world. In this theme, we explore environmental racism of the past and center environmental justice in the pursuit of safe living spaces for low-income and communities of color. Featured in the exhibition is this collage from the late 18th century. Although we are unsure of the green pigment chemistry used in this collage, in the 18th and 19th centuries, dyers often used arsenic dust as pigment on clothing, furniture, wallpaper, and toys. Scientists established the dangers of using arsenic pigments by the early 19th century, but Paris green and similar compounds remained popular through the end of the 1800s. These two images depict the environmental and health dangers of green arsenic dyes during the 19th century. The medical illustration shows the impact of arsenic poisoning on a patient's hands. The political cartoon mocks the use of arsenic in dancing the waltz, comparing the perceived moral dangers of waltzing and the physical dangers of arsenic pigmented fabrics.
Next, we examined women and feminism. Women in Western cultures have historically been subjected to sexist and patriarchal oppression. That is, they are treated as inferior to men. Feminists have brought much attention and societal change regarding this subjugation since about the mid-19th century. Women with compounding marginalizations have not historically had their needs considered in mainstream, white, heteronormative, ableist, and middle or upper class feminism among citizens. Through the objects we feature in this theme, we illustrate past efforts to combat women's oppression and aim to center intersectionally marginalized women's positions in society. We featured this lingerie dress from circa 1905 in this theme. White was a prominent color worn by suffragettes who participated in protests and marches, with some wearing lingerie dresses, similar to this circa 1905 example, and others wearing white suit ensembles. Suffrage efforts proved successful, with some women becoming eligible to vote in 1920. Black, Indigenous, and women of color were barred from voting due to a variety of laws and discrimination targeting specific races, ethnicities, and people who could not read or write the English language. Some intersectionally marginalized women were still prevented from voting over 50 years after their white, English-speaking women counterparts began voting, issues which continue into the 21st century. Recently, Congresswomen have worn white ensembles to several State of the Union addresses in a visual demonstration of solidarity that references the wearing of white by suffragettes. These two images represent demonstrations for women's suffrage and women's rights 107 years apart. The image on the left depicts US Democratic Congresswomen wearing white at President Trump's State of the Union address in 2019, and the image on the right shows the Women's Political Union March for Suffrage in 1912. In the final theme of our exhibition, we examine the concept of shifting masculinities. The gender binary, or woman-man, is a hallmark of Western social systems. The binary puts forth strict definitions of particular genders that are tied to sex assigned at birth. In this theme, we focus on conceptions of masculinity and how they have varied throughout time in Western contexts. Through these stories, the absence of traditional ideas of masculinity is apparent, as each period has had its own unique ideas surrounding masculinity and self-presentation. The final object, a tailor-made from circa 1910, exemplifies societal shifts in traditional gendered dress. Drawing influence from men's suits, some tailor-made ensembles in the late 19th and early 20th centuries blurred the boundaries between masculinity and femininity. Considering this, tailor-mades may have been considered by some as the uniform of the independent working woman. Despite these debates, the mannish mode continued in various forms for several decades into the 20th century, notably in the 1930s. In closing, we want to emphasize how centering social justice within fashion history is vital. The stories in this exhibition are a few of the many often omitted from dominant narratives about the history of fashion. Countless voices and stories still have yet to be heard, but many museums are making important shifts towards centering justice in their exhibition content, online content, and guiding principles. We hope to inspire you in the future to continue thinking about representation of marginalized experiences and take action in promoting equity.
For access to our full reference list, please visit the digital exhibition website. We would like to extend a special thanks to the following individuals for assisting in making this exhibition possible and providing critical feedback throughout the research and development process. We also express appreciation for the endowed Agatha Huben Becker Burnett Graduate Student Assistantship, which funded us to create this great exhibition. And thank you all, and please visit our digital exhibition and physical exhibition in the Mary Alice Gallery to learn more.
Thank you all so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed your exhibit. I thought it was well researched, visually compelling. I love the look of it and all the different media you were able to include. So this question goes to whoever wants to answer it, or all of you. Why did you pick Sway as your platform? Yeah.
I can take that one. So I worked out really closely with developing the platform and kind of organizing everything digitally, that is. We wanted to have not only a platform that would be open access, but a platform that would be inclusive in terms of accessibility and inclusive in terms of financial reasons. As we are a part of the university and the museum is funded by the university, we don't necessarily have as huge of a budget as larger institutions like the Met. So Sway was a platform that we had free access to through the university. And also it's a platform that necessarily we don't have to pay for monthly, and we can keep it up for as long as we want.
Those are all excellent reasons. I know the library, we're very open access enthusiastic, so for excellent reasons. My next question goes to all of you. Could you please describe your research process for this exhibit?
Sure, I can take this one. And then if either of you guys want to add anything, feel free, of course. So initially we started by looking at the exhibition catalog from this 2013 exhibition, the Treasures of the Textiles and Clothing Museum. So we looked at that and we kind of picked whichever objects we thought looked cool or might have some potential just right off the bat in applying a social justice lens or telling kind of different stories. But these often changed as we did more research. So we either found that a couple objects were like, we couldn't really find a lot of information for that. But others is like, for example, on the website, we have a motoring veil. When I first saw it, was like, this would be great for the environmental justice category, right? Because it's a product of industrialization and the widening use of the motor car, right? But as I was doing more research into the Vogue and Women's Wear Daily archives, I noticed that a lot of the writers were referring to those objects using kind of appropriated language and talking about how the veils were reminiscent of veils worn by Muslim women. And I found that like much more interesting and compelling and a lot more direct. So it kind of changed over time as well. But we used archives to determine the information and kind of really choose the correct theme or the theme that we felt fit best, because a lot of them, right, could go into multiple themes and were intersectional. But we initially looked at the book and then kind of went from there.
I kind of just add on to that. The process is, Kira mentioned, it is a long process, and you do kind of reorganize things. And we had like a 5-circle Venn diagram, and then eventually we added on the 6th theme, and it was kind of having little digital images of like where different objects fit in. And obviously, so many of these objects are really great and they don't just fit into one category. So we kind of had to move things around and maybe see, okay, well, based on the research that we can find and we have access to, because remember, we did this initial exhibition all digitally and it opened online back July 31st. And then we came back to campus and did the physical exhibition that opened October 1st. So it was kind of just figuring out from the research that we had where things go, what fits, what doesn't fit, and kind of it was a lot of just kind of going back and forth and reanalyzing and working with research. And I think that it really did help that we had such a big team to do this, because creating an exhibition, doing all this research, it's a process and it does require revising and revisions and kind of a lot of different iterations of the rough draft before you guys get to see the final product.
Do you have anything to add, Joshua?
No, I'm all set. Thank you, though.
Excellent. I'm going to keep my video off. I'm experiencing some internet instability. So this question is also for all of you, and applies to, your research for both the digital and, in-person exhibit. I know is, it's that, were you able to do any in-person research, or was it all, what, I know you probably had to do some, online, I'm sure. And were there any surprises in the research that you did, that you found, weren't expecting?
I can quickly answer like the first half of that question. So we were not, because all the research we did was last year during COVID. And the running joke when we finished was that we literally did all this research across 4 states and 2 time zones. So like the entire team, us, Dr. Gordon, Dr. Reddy Bess, all of us, when we first started this, and for a majority of the time that we were doing this, like we were, a lot of us were out of state. So it was really, truly like a cross-country collaboration online.
Wow, that makes sense to me. I wasn't sure because, but I figured that it was a lot of online research. My next question. Oh, so my next question is, why did you all select? I'm sure there were other exhibit catalogs. The exhibit catalog, Treasures of the Textiles and Clothing Museum from 2013, is perfect for this exhibit, I think. And how did you select it? Or why did you select it?
I can take that one, and feel free to add anything, Ginger, Kira, if I miss anything. I guess I would say there's a few reasons kind of why we selected this one. First is like language such as treasures is really strong when you think about how, you think of the idea of treasures conjuring up imagery of something being valuable or having value inscribed upon it. And so looking through this catalog, it's essentially saying these are the objects that we think, and these are the stories associated with these objects that the museum at the time, thought were valuable, the curators deemed were important. And so because of that, with this kind of shift that we experienced with changing our mission and some of our guiding principles, we thought, how are we as an institution, ascribing value and ascribing worth to objects and whose stories are being determined to be treasures. And so that strong language behind that was a big factor in kind of, dissecting the whole conception of treasures and who is considered valuable in these types of collections, whose stories, that type of thing. And then another part of it stemmed too, because we were working, within the confines of being in an online space, we weren't able to go in. Typically, we would go in and, professionally photograph any sort of objects we didn't have professional photos of. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, we weren't able to do that. And this catalog happened to have a really great supply of a bunch of different really nice photographs. And it represented a lot of different time periods, different types of objects. It wasn't, just a specific era or a specific, type of thing. So it was really nice to get that variety and also to have those photographs available to us online already.
Also, just to reiterate, these exhibition catalogs were published, they were bound, and they looked really nice, and it was kind of like one of the exhibitions they put a lot of time and money into and really wanted to be representative of the collection, again, like treasures, but just the physical books themselves. And they also, these were widely distributed, and you could actually purchase one because they're bound. You could get them for free. Sometimes they would also bring them to, when doing recruitment and promoting the collection to other institutions, they would bring copies. So I actually got one from my undergraduate institution because the curator was visiting. So this also was supposed to really represent the goals and missions of the museum. So we wanted to kind of show how those are shifting now.
Thank you, Kira. And to also add, that catalog is added to the library collection in the general collection and also special collections if anyone wanted to check it out. One question, we have a question from the audience, and then I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. overall, how long did it take to put this exhibition together from start to finish, and maybe inception of idea to publishing and presenting on this exhibition?
So kind of somebody just asked me that the other day, and I had to think about that for a second, because it feels like we've worked on it for so long, but it's also feel like it went by really fast. I believe we started the digital, because you have to bear in mind, like the digital exhibition is when we did a bulk of our research. So we started that at the beginning of spring semester last year, I believe. We kind of started talking about it end of fall. And then that was, digital exhibition was up July 31st. And then the physical exhibition, which when I say this, it's crazy. The digital exhibition basically got mounted, everything done in about a little over a month. So everything you see in the Mary Alice Gallery, that got all of that. Printing, the posters, labels, all of that was about a little bit over a month.
Wow, that's some speedy work. We do exhibitions in the library, and that is, and museum exhibitions are a whole different thing. That's very speedy work. Well, thank you, curators, for sharing your research with us and your time. And thank you, audience, for attending.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.